We had too many good hymns. We just had too many good ones. What happens sometimes? Oh Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. Make haste to help me, O Lord. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. Praise to you, O Christ. Hallelujah. Blessed be God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Oh, come, let us worship Him. Right, we are going to be singing Thy Strong Word in church this morning. We're going to sing stanza 1 of it, largely because this hymn is really a reflection, at least in part, on Genesis 1, which we're studying right now. So that's kind of fun. But I'm going to ask my wife if she can help me lead this hymn. Thy strong word in the darkness, at thy speaking it was done. For created by thee, thank thee, while thy ordered seasons run. Hallelujah, hallelujah, praise to thee who light does send. Hallelujah, 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 without end. Right, today we hear from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. There are a lot of things to like about that, of course. The part that I find very interesting is that God reveals Himself in weakness through His Word, not by our powers of persuasion. I like the saying that nobody has ever been argued into heaven. And in the same way, no one has ever been convinced of the gospel because I said just the right thing. It is not about my words, but Christ's words and work. So I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. O Lord, keep your family, the church, continually in the true faith, that relying on the hope of your heavenly grace, we may ever be defended by your mighty power. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Amen. Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen. All right. Off you go, young'uns. Munchkins, young'uns.
I left the space for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thursday, the nominations committee is hosting a vocation fair. This is not a vacation fair where you learn how to get out of here. It is a vocation fair where we talk about God's callings, and particularly His calling and work here at Holy Cross. We have a lot of different roles and works and positions, some of which are very obvious, some of which are a lot less obvious, but all of them are important, each in their own way. So I would really love and encourage you to try and come. It should be no more than an hour is my expectation. And that will be at 7 o'clock on Thursday night. We did not get to do as much sign-ups and advertisings and such as I would have liked for this, but that's okay. We'll do it anyways. So if you're able to come Thursday night, that is great. Catherine.
Because it's my job to be the one that asks the questions that
no one else will ask?
Yes. That's just the way I am. So does this mean perhaps that even if you feel like, well, gee, I don't really, have much to contribute, or I haven't been here very long, or maybe, I'm young or I'm old or I'm this or I'm that maybe you would like some people who haven't maybe done these things should just come and see maybe if they could?
She asks, knowingly.
Of course,
Yes, this is for anyone who's interested in the life of our church.
Agreed.
Yeah, anyone who's interested in the life of the church, and I would say kind of high school through adult. And because there are lots of different things, some of them may include a position that is on planning council, but a lot of times we have sort of subcommittees and other things, and just things that need to get done that don't involve our kind of our structure quite so carefully. So yes, so one and all. Dennis.
Just a reminder that many hands make for life work.
That is exactly right.
You need many hands.
Yeah. And oftentimes what happens in any church, we are hardly unique to this. In any church is that you have the same group of people kind of doing all of the things, and then they kind of burn out. And so if there's a rotation, it is healthier for the body. I would put it that way. Kim.
Where is the location?
We're going to start in the fellowship hall, and then we might move up here. We'll see.
There was a letter last week that went out, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not that there has been nothing. It was not last week. It was Thursday or Friday before. So like 10 days. Yes, Barbara.
I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off looking for students, and there's a crock pot in the kitchen that's plugged in but not turned on.
Yeah.
Is it supposed to be turned on?
No.
No?
So leave it. That's what that says.
I think so.
Right.
Thank you, Barbara!
Okay. Are there any other announcements that I have missed this past week, which is entirely possible? I got back from St. Louis about 9 o'clock last night, so I am a wee bit jet lagged, but very glad to be back with you and not have any other trips until the end of April. So that is a very, very good thing. Okay, let's move over to what we are doing, and this is kind of what we talked about last week. Is this beginning, and I particularly talked about two things, and that was disorder and order, or chaos and creation, kind of those two pieces. And The Franzman hymn that we sang not too long ago also referenced one other piece that we get here in Genesis 1, which is darkness and light. That in darkness there is darkness and chaos, the unknown, confusion. All of these things kind of come from the darkness. And so God in creation brings order, not in the Achtung sort of order, although I suppose there is some element of that, but in the sense of structure, that God creates structure. So this is the difference between things growing wild and a cultivated garden. That kind of picture that God in His creation intends to make it so that everything may become what it is intended to be. Let me say that one more time. God in creation makes things so that they may become what they are intended to be, which I think is a really interesting picture. Now, I had a question come into me from this week that on the surface may seem peculiar, but this is actually a very serious question, and I want you to kind of stick with me on this question because it will very much help us as we continue to talk about creation. Today, I self-identify as an earthworm. God created earthworms. Earthworms have both sexes. God created me. Although I have an assigned sex, God created my mind with both sexes. I am both. Did God intend for me to be confused? I love God and I love my neighbor and myself. What does this mean? What should I do? I'm so confused. All right. So there are a couple things about this question that are very interesting that I want to hold up for you all. Number one, this is what I would call a pious question. This is not a question that is intended to belittle or to mock God at all. This is a very serious question that a Christian can pose, and it's a perfect example of the sort of question that I really do believe that many people, especially younger people today, face and wrestle with. And the question of sexuality is definitely one of them. We talked a little bit about homosexuality and desires. So you have the question of desire, what do I want? But this question kind of takes it from, I'll say, from the opposite direction and asks, what is it that I see in myself? And kind of common language sometimes in our culture today is the language of identity. Have you ever heard the phrase identity politics? You ever heard that expression? Well, and so that's kind of what this uses is this question of my identity. Who am I? What am I? And the example of an earthworm is really an interesting one because, I mean, I know not all of you are boys. See, I'm perceptive. Not all of you are boys, but boys love cutting up earthworms. Believe me. And earthworms will reproduce because earthworms contain both sexes. Now, that is a gross oversimplification. I know. just stay with me here. Okay? No comments from you, biology student. But that's kind of where questions like this come from, is seeing something in creation where the kind of nice binary category, male and female, does not seem like it fits. Okay? And so today you certainly have people, and we will at the appropriate time sort of discuss what are the causes of that, kind of where does that idea come from. But regardless of the cause, let's kind of put pause on that cause question for a minute. Regardless of the cause, the reality is that people, often young people, but by no means exclusively so, often young people become extremely confused and despairing over these kinds of issues. So we, as a church, sort of have a couple ways that we can respond to it. One way to respond to it is to say, "You're not a worm, you goof. Stop it." And that's very tempting, because that kind of fits with our own, maybe that fits with our own identity, our own self-righteousness, honestly. But that's ultimately probably not all that helpful. So the question is, how do we think through things together faithfully? Okay? So we're going to talk about this through the lens of creation. All right? And I'm not going to try to answer this question right this second. But this is a question, or similar ones, that are kind of going to sort of keep piling up, that we're going to try to kind of walk through. And I hope that through the scriptures we can start to get a sense of understanding how do we as Christians sort of approach these questions in ways that are helpful. Does anyone have any other questions for me right now? Dennis?
I see this person's question, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is God created you as a child of God before you are dealing with this kind of fear, frustration, question.
Sure.
You are first and foremost a child of God.
Right.
And the other part of it is I think as young people are growing up, regardless of the age that they're living in, completely have questions about who am I, how do I fit in the world, and what is going to happen to me as I become an adult.
Sure. Which is not exactly a new millennium question, right? That is a very human question. That is a part of our growth and development as human beings. Is sort of understanding and wrestling with our identity, with my identity and relationships to my parents and my family. You know, children developmentally go through different types and periods and kinds of separation that happens, and what does that look like, and how, why, etc. So yeah, that's all a part of it. And that's why when we get at this identity question, this is a question, and there are a few things that I love more than for someone to ask me an identity question. That's kind of like a softball, just sort of, ow, it's just there. Because our identity, who I am, that's in Christ. My identity is bound up completely and utterly in my baptism. That's who I am. What I'm not is my sin or my problems. You guys have heard me rant occasionally about how carefully we have to speak about illnesses, that we don't make an illness into an identity, or not, or if it is an identity, it is entirely secondary. So, you know, just taking my own example with clinical depression, I don't want to be Todd the depressoretic. Just like you wouldn't, yes, that is a made-up word. Just like someone with cancer, you wouldn't call, oh, you're so-and-so, the canceretic. Cancerin. And I actually learned this from a conversation with my wife's brother, John, who has diabetes. And I don't even remember, we were probably camping. And him talking to me about how he really dislikes being called a diabetic, which, you know, that is actually quite common, I would say. That's very common language. We've just sort of done it because and this is my brother-in-law John. I don't want to be defined by my disease. I am not my disease. I am John in this instance. And how important is it when we think about people, when we talk about people, when we relate to other people, that we actually continually, intentionally, proactively identify them as human beings, which means children of God, loved by God, bought with the blood of Christ, and in the instance of a Christian, baptized into Christ's name. And so I am not ashamed of being called a Christian, because that is my identity, is that I am in Christ. I am a little Christ. So those sort of little things can matter in how we think and talk about these things. And that's, you know, maybe one of the sub-themes that I hope run through our conversations here. Paul.
As we move forward into this discussion, are we to assume as a fact that God can create a mind with both sexes?
See, I know you guys are just always impatient. You want to keep, and I like this because you force me to keep moving. We're going to come back to this question because of that precise line, and that has to do with our common kind of understanding of gender and of sexuality. So we're gonna get back to that question, Paul, I promise you, and nag me about it if I don't.
Well, Catherine will nag you.
Okay. Well, that's probably true too.
Well, first of all, we have to start with Genesis. And God does not tell us every question that we might have about it.
Of course.
He tells what he wants us to know and what he did.
Right.
And the second thing is, with this statement on the board here, I am so confused. We are also, all of us are confused because we come with original sin.
Sure. And I would suggest to you that in our conversations with other people, this certainly doesn't have to do explicitly with questions about human sexuality. This is called being human. Okay? This is being human with Pastor Peperkorn. Is working on and learning to find common ground with other people is more important than establishing that they're wrong. Or that you're right. Which of course often go hand in hand. Even if you are right. Maybe, especially if you're right. Learning to find, let me say it again, learning to find common ground and ways of speaking and relating to other people is more important than any, I'll say, short-term goal of establishing that somebody else is wrong and that you're right. Notice, this is also equally important. I am not saying that there is not truth. Of course there is truth that is revealed to us in the scriptures, that's delivered to us by his word. That is not the point. But because God has delivered His word, His truth, His reality to us through His word, I don't have to cling to it so tightly like it is reliant on me to exist, because it's not. It'll be there. It's okay. Breathe. It'll be all right. Gary.
Is that what Paul is saying when he says, I've become all things?
Yeah, that would be my argument there, is that what Paul is saying is that I don't have to defend the truth in such a way that that I use the truth as a way of actually alienating other people and beating other people. The truth may do so. You know, the gospel is a stumbling block and foolishness, etc. But I don't have to actually help it along by being a fool myself in how I think and act. Jim, behind your hand up there. Nothing? Okay. So I want to get back to, or Gary, yeah, go ahead with follow-up.
I used to belong to a different denomination, and there was a youth pastor who took that verse from Paul and said, well, if I smoke with the young folk, then I'm just doing that because that's my way of ministering to them becoming all things to all people.
So being all things to all people does not mean that I sin in order to relate to people. I don't actually have to try. That I get this. I sin in many and various ways. Without trying. That's simply not what Paul means. Even though that is, I would say, a common misinterpretation there. Heaven.
How then do we factor in being in the presence of sin or occasion of sin?
Well, I think that is the magic question, isn't it? How do we factor in being in the presence of sin? Which, of course, I am always in the presence of sin because of my heart. But I am also always in the presence of Christ because of my baptism. That this is the continual battle that we all wage every day. Now, it's a battle that's been won because of Jesus' death and resurrection, but it is still a battle, and so we can't lose sight of that. All right, I'm gonna move us along a little bit, but I also have to pause for 1 second and say welcome home, Deaconess. Next week she's going to talk to us a little bit about her trip, but we'll give her an extra week to meditate on it a bit too. But we're very excited. All right, so let's kind of get back at Genesis a little bit. All right, and God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. Well, here we get both order and questions, right? We can see the order, and there you're going to find if you read, as we read Genesis 1 especially, you find that there are what I would call order words. All right, and here the order word is the word separate. Okay, so we get the creation word, but then there are also these ordering words that kind of just define or describe how these things are to be. Okay, so here the waters are separated from the waters, and here we have the waters that are under and the waters that are above the expanse. There comes our question. And in order to kind of really really unpack that a little bit more, we really have to look at Genesis chapter 6 and the flood. But suffice it to say that here, we don't get all the answers. So if you're hoping for all the answers, you're going to have to find a different Bible class. But what we get is that God has it, He makes it. He makes this expanse and then separates the water above from below. So you will sometimes find this this expanse sort of portrayed like a canopy over the earth. And I'm not saying that you're going to be able to figure this out scientifically. Okay, so just, recognize that. What we have is a description here, not a scientific experiment. And so something along the lines of a canopy. So we know, for instance, that in the Garden of Eden it doesn't rain, kind of like we experience today. That there are things and pieces that are very different here at creation than what we get after the fall and after the flood, because that expanse stuff comes up a lot in the flood.
Why doesn't it rain?
Why doesn't it rain? Because of the expanse. There's just the mist that comes. I mean, that's what you get in Genesis 2. Yeah. But what I want you to kind of pull from this right now is this language of creation that we're going to keep getting, God making things, and the language here of separation and order. That God separates things, He orders them, puts them in place. So we could use the word establish. He establishes them. I kind of like that. Language there too. And also notice, this of course is true from the beginning, how does God make and separate these things? He does not get the big expanse-making Acme construction crew, right? You don't see that. Here in the scriptures, what we see is God creating and ordering things by His word. God speaks and it is so. And this is both comforting and terribly frustrating for us. It's comforting because God speaks and it is so. It is frustrating because we as human beings are naturally curious. We like to know. We want to know. We get that in chapter 3, right? But we want to know. And the whole realm of science is essentially a question of why and how. What, why, and how, perhaps. And that is not bad. That's a good thing. This is again, I would argue, how God has created us. But that does not mean that we're going to get all of the answers that we want out of the scriptures. Let me say that one more time, because that is also quite important. It does not mean that we are going to get all of the answers that we want out of the scriptures, because the scriptures were, the line does not go, these things were written so that you may have all of your curiosity satisfied, right? These things were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. That the purpose of the scriptures is to create and sustain us in faith. So there is both comfort and tension there. Mary.
Well, God has a plan. That's pretty much the message of the Bible. That's our message for Christianity as well. He's got a plan. We don't understand the plan. And we sometimes question the plan.
Sure.
But there's a plan.
Sure. There is and that is true, and there's nothing wrong with that. I tend to like saying that God has a purpose. a little bit better, simply because God had, the way I guess I would put it is God has an end goal. Maybe that's just my own, kind of how my head kind of runs with this question. But to say that God has a purpose, He has an intention in what He does. This is that kind of gets at the cross this morning in our text for this morning. God's intention for you is that you would live. And that you would have life in His name. That's God's intention. That's His desire for you. And of course that means that there is a plan. I'm not saying that there isn't a plan. But I tend to gravitate toward how does God look at me, or why does God look at me in this way? And kind of thinking, because sometimes when I hear God has a plan, what that actually is saying, I'm not saying that you meant this, Mary, okay? What people hear is, God has a plan, so shut up. Because you don't know what it is.
I didn't say that.
I know you didn't. I know you didn't. But this is why when we think about these kind of things, we have to sort of think about not only what I'm saying, but how it's heard. So, my wife, this is not true, okay? So if my wife and I just had a miscarriage and you said to me, well, God has a plan, I'm going to smack you.
Yeah.
Okay? Because at that instant, God's plan looks like He wants to kill my child, which is a pretty lousy plan. But to say that God has purpose, or to say that God's intention for you is that you would live, or that they would live, I think is much more pastoral. That's how I would look at it. Speaking of pastoral, Pastor Froh.
Just a thought in that regard. I think some of the newer translations do us a tremendous disservice with Romans 8:28,
Okay.
because in the Greek, it's very clear that God is the one doing the purposing there.
Right.
God works
For the rest
all
of us,
things.
will you tell us what Romans 8:28 is?
Well, some people say it says all things work together for good to those who love God.
Yes.
But the Greek says God works all things together for good to those who love Him.
Yeah, God's the one working.
Yeah.
Right.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah, God's the one doing the working. Absolutely. And there you get that purpose, intention, kind of goal stuff. And this is all built into our understanding of creation. Right? This is what's happening. God's intention in creation is that it would be good, that it would have purpose. All right? So here we get the word separate. Let's move on. Mr. Felix, would you be so kind as to serve as my errand for a moment and read that for me?
And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together He called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which there is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day.
All right. So what are the creation words? What's the creation words that we get here? Let, something like that. Yeah. Let the earth, etc. And then the order word.
Kind.
Yeah, two of them. Gather, gathered, and kinds, or according to their kinds, if you would rather. Okay, so here we had God separating as a way of ordering, and then here you have God gathering as a way of ordering things and creating things. And so first the waters are gathered together in their place so that dry land can appear. And so there you have, it's interesting that gather and separate are really two sides of the same coin, aren't they? If I am separating two things, I am also gathering them in two places, right? So that it's just fascinating how we get sort of different perspectives in creation on how God does this work. Here you have the water under the heavens is gathered. So this is not the waters of the expanse or of the canopy, but here it is the waters under the heavens. And then we get this according to their kinds. And we're going to get that multiple times kind of coming through here, all right? And that is that the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding fruit according to their own kinds, trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind or type. So it's very important that we kind of understand what this means and what it doesn't mean. What it means is that a tree is not going to create a rock, because those are different. They are different kinds. They are different things. Okay? And so, in other words, this is a part of the ordering of creation, and that order, or law, if you prefer, means structure. Okay, and that structure is put in place so that these things may flourish. Okay. If you structure things in a certain way, then the thing will be able to flourish or serve its purpose. So again, thinking of the garden analogy, and those of you who are actual gardeners and not gardeners in their mind like me, those of you who are actual gardeners can answer me or correct me if I'm wrong on this. But in gardening, you are thinking about lots of different factors, right? The soil, what kind of soil there is. The sunlight, what kind of sunlight there is. The moisture, how much rain, where does the rain sit? There are all kinds of different factors that involved, and that they are not the same from plant to plant or tree to tree, right? Some things grow well in one climate, and other things grow well in a different climate. And that is because of the nature of the thing. Is everybody with me so far? As I said, and in some ways this is sort of common sense, but maybe it's not that common. That's what this according to their kinds means along the way. Rick.
Just to amplify that again, it's very specific to species. One of the first things in forestry you learn is about what's called tolerance. The fact that some trees will only grow under other trees, some cannot grow under other trees.
Right.
And that's tolerance for shade. And
Right.
it's very specific by species.
Right. And that there is a range. I mean, that's what a tolerance is essentially establishing a range that says this kind of tree will only grow at this altitude, or this kind of tree can no longer grow at this altitude. You know, you go into the mountains, and eventually you hit the tree line, right? So that certain things can't grow above that tree line. That doesn't mean nothing, but that means certain things can't. I mean, this is really kind of remarkable the more you think about it, that this is how God created things to be. This is God's intention, is that they would have this order, this structure, this way of functioning and working so that what? So that they can thrive. So that they can actually live and function and work, and that these plants will yield seed and the trees will bear fruit, and so that these things will actually be able to be what God intends. There's that purpose language, remember? That God's purpose for a fruit tree is that it does what? Bears fruit. Right? And when a fruit tree doesn't bear fruit, then something has to change along the way. I mean, you think of it, you think of how that exact analogy is used in connection with sin later on. That all ties back to this notion of creation, purpose, intention. How does God actually do things? Rick.
Another perfect nature example is all the animal species. Think of birds in general. They all seem so much alike, but a blue jay cannot ever mate with a robin.
Right.
Not even one sparrow can mate with another sparrow, and they can't. A blue jay can't look at a cardinal's nest and say, maybe I should make a nest like
close
it.
enough. Yeah, close enough. Right. That is true both for birds and in baseball. Sorry, just when's the catchers and pitchers report? So this is how God wants the world to work, which is remarkable and amazing. Barbara.
So here we see in Genesis, even the very first chapter, that God is a God of order.
Yeah.
And he has a purpose for everything. Nothing happens by accident with God. So to me, that's very comforting, because you can depend on what God says and what God does.
That's right. That's right. And that is God's desire and intention is that things be ordered so that they can flourish, not that they would be ordered so that they can be constricted or bound. And do you remember way back when we were doing the 10 Commandments? Was it a year ago, a year and a half ago, 10 years ago? When we were doing the 10 Commandments, one of the things that I held up for you all was that God gives the commandments in order to protect his gifts. Do you remember that? That God gives the commandments in order to protect his gifts so that his gifts may thrive. In other words, order in order to thrive. That's purpose, that's intention, that's structure. That's exactly what we're talking about here. He doesn't say to the fruit tree, I'm going to make you bear fruit. Even if you don't want to, I'm going to make you bear fruit. No, he's saying this is who you are, so to speak. And you can talk to a tree that way. And maybe some of you have talked to trees that way. Why aren't you bearing fruit? Right, but this is so that creation may grow and flourish and be everything in God's intention and desire. This is a good thing.
The tension today, it seems like, is climate change and God giving us dominion over the earth. And so that I guess the climate change people think that we're a sinful race, and that
which is true, to be fair.
We're destroying the earth by man-made things, but God has, on the other flip side, God has given us dominion over the things of the earth to enjoy.
Right.
So I mean, this environmental awareness has been going on for years, not just climate change. Sure. From way back, from clear-cut logging that I used to be involved with, and to saving the earth and not cutting down one tree
Well,
for our
and
purpose.
and this is kind of my intention, my purpose. See, somebody put this on the thing. What is the goal of this discussion? Right, so, you know, what is my intention and purpose behind this is that we establish how God orders and works in creation first, before we talk about sin and the reintroduction of chaos and disorder. And where specifically does male and female fit in that order of disorder? That's what we're doing here, is we're building a foundation of understanding of how God works. Is everybody with me still? Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. Rick, would you please?
And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, a greater light to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, the fourth day.
All right. So the creation language we get, of course, is we still get that let or let there be language. What's the ordering words in this? Set. It's a little word that's kind of easy to miss, right? God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light onto the earth. So we have separation, we have gathering, and now we have setting, or if you prefer, establishing. That the sun and the moon are set, they are put in place for a specific purpose and a specific way. Now, you sciencey types are looking at this. I know what you're thinking. The moon doesn't have any light. What's it talking about here? I mean, and you know, you sciencey types, that the light is reflection from the sun onto the moon, onto the earth. This is descriptive of what you see. It is not science manual. Okay? So when you look in the sky, you see the sun and the moon, and that they are established, they have a place, they have an order, they follow a pattern, and we can learn more about these orders and settings and patterns, etc., etc. One of my dear friends on the Board of Regents at Concordia Seminary is an astrophysicist at Harvard. I know it sounds very... His name's Paul Edmond. He's a total geek.
But he explains black holes really well. So
Yeah, he
you can
does.
understand.
He's also a really good teacher.
Yeah.
And it's fun. So he's an astronomer, a physicist, and that this kind of notion of you're looking at the phenomenon, you're describing what is seen and understood. We're not getting at kind of the why questions behind it there. So again, what's important? God continues to create by His Word, and in this creation by His Word, He orders things as they are intended. Now I have one last story that I have to tell you before we close, because it has to do with the moon. So another one of my friends and colleagues, his name is Pastor Kaseman, Bruce Kaseman, preached in chapel on Friday. And I don't remember how he got there, but somehow or another he got on the topic of how, it was let your light shine so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. That was what the context was. And he did a little mini discussion on this sun and moon thing, and about how what we do is we don't reflect our own light, our own wisdom and knowledge and understanding, but rather that God's light reflects off of us onto others. This is a very pretty picture. I like that. But of course what he did was he said, now go therefore and moon the world.
You're letting sin influence you.
Well, I did observe that I wasn't sure the seminary had insurance for that kind of thing. He is a really good preacher. On that very pious note, we are going to close. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Beautiful.